go.
Okay, and if you want, Kristen, we can also take them off of listen only. I'm not sure if that's something that I do or if that's something
Everybody's
on
on
your end.
listen only. I believe Linda is self-muted, so when she's ready to chat, she can take herself off mute.
Okay, perfect. So welcome. Hello, Linda. I hope you're well out there. So what we're going to do is we're going to spend the next, I would say, 40 minutes or so reviewing benchmarks and specifically benchmarking with DISC. And what we're going to do is just leave the mic open. So at any point that you have a question, a comment, would like a clarification, feel free just to jump in at any point, and anyone else who comes in can feel free to do the same thing. And so with benchmarking, creating benchmarks, pre-hire benchmarks is something that I have been doing for about the last 15 years or so, both with organizations, but also maybe even more so with partnering with coaches and with consultants on how to effectively do that with their clients. So benchmarking is very much a nuts and bolts, almost system usage component of what we do. And one of the first thoughts that I had was, how do I create something that's a little bit more compelling for a coach? And so I kind of came up with this statement here, which is, what if I could show a simple, practical way to expand your business and help you to make more money? And what we found is that when we put it into those terms, that there's a little bit more grab to it than just talking through what a benchmark is and potentially how to create them and what have you, but really get into, for you, the why that it would be useful and compelling and interesting and something that you would want to reach out and have your clients get involved with. So why use pre-hire assessment tools? I guess that's a good place to start. The primary reason that organizations use pre-hire assessment tools, and therefore coaches and consultants get involved with them, is to cut turnover. I would say that is number one. And so there's, certainly a cost avoidance, which is cutting turnover. And of course, the great flip side of that is increasing profitability, increasing productivity. So just a couple of statistics to sort of set the stage there. And we'll look specifically right now at managerial positions. This is some data from the Society of Human Resource Professionals, better known as SHRM, is that for managerial positions, the average time when someone has left the organization, the average time to fill that position is 68 days, so about 2 months of time. And the recruiting costs associated with filling that position are about 20% of whatever that salary is, just in recruiting. So that's the time HR is putting into it, the resources that they need to get advertising out and to be going through the process of interviewing and all that. So all combined is about a 20% cost. During that time, there's also a huge dip, as you could probably imagine, in productivity as you have a department that's sharing a manager from somewhere else, or just sort of has no managerial oversight for that period of time while they're finding someone else to come in and fill that gap. And in the study, 66%, so 2/3 of organizations that contributed to the study said that each individual turnover cost them in excess of $25,000. When you have all of the costs factored in together, that it's about $25,000 per turnover for a managerial position. And the national average at of my last check is 18.2%. That's just about how much we're turning employees over. And of course, depending on your industry, that may be higher or lower. But one of the interesting statistics is around drivers. So drivers make up the largest pool of employees in our country. There are more drivers than anything. And the turnover in that industry is well above 50%. So there's lots of room to refine and grow and improve. Now, if we take just those assumptions, so 18.2% turnover being average, and 2/3 saying that turnover costs are $25,000 or more, what we'll do is we'll sort of apply that to a situation. And so there was a hospital group that looked at this as a study, and the hospital group had 800 nurses as part of their system of hospitals. And what they were finding was that they were turning nurses over at an alarming rate. So 27% turnover, and there's a variety of reasons for that turnover, but chief among them is just making sure that the job fit of the nursing work, as well as the needs and culture of their particular hospital system was being met. So a nurse in one environment doesn't necessarily, the needs of that environment don't necessarily translate everywhere. So every hospital system is going to have some unique cultural components that help or hurt in terms of their turnover number. And so what they were trying to do by using pre-hire assessment tools was to create a 5% improvement. And that's not insignificant, but it's also not a huge number, because by saying that they're looking for a 5% improvement, they're not even trying to get all the way down to the national average of 18.2. If they could get themselves down to about 22% turnover, they would consider that reaching goal. And so here are how the numbers break down. If you have 800 nurses and there's 27% turnover, you're looking at turning over about 216 positions a year, which is a lot. The improvement that they're looking for, however, wasn't all that much. So what they were saying was, out of 800 nurses, could they keep 11 more in a given year? So out of 800, to try to figure out how to create better hiring practices, better interviewing practices, better selection practices, the total number of 11 seems quite manageable. And here's what they found out, is by reaching that 5% goal, by using pre-hire assessments now as part of a more robust, more thoughtful pre-hire practice, is that small amount, those 11 nurses, when you factor in $25,000 plus per, comes out to about $275,000. And I think that when you look at what you're trying to achieve, which is 11 nurses not turning over, and then looking at the amount of straight to the bottom line income, very easily measured income to the organization at $275,000, it became apparent very quickly that using pre-hire assessments was something not only that they wanted to use for nurses, but they wanted to spread that usage out into lots of different areas where they were seeing turnover or trouble or cultural fit issues, because the financial benefits to the organization were so strong. So one of the questions that we get when it comes to pre-hire assessments is, well, what about the EEOC? What about fair hiring practices? Is DISC something that we can legally use as part of our pre-hire practice? And so I like to tell folks that the EEOC does not approve any assessments. They're not in the business of approving individual assessments to give them the, quote unquote, stamp of approval. What they do is they approve assessment types. And one of the types of assessments are behavioral / personality characteristic assessments, which DISC fits very neatly into, certainly in a widely recognized way. DISC is not a tool that's just being introduced to the marketplace. So it easily meets the EEOC guideline of the type of assessment that you are allowed to use as part of pre-hire practices. And when it comes to the EEOC, the most important components of it are that you're using the assessment fairly and uniformly across all spectrums, which basically means you cannot pick and choose who it is that gets assessed as part of a hiring decision. If you are including an invitation to take an assessment in an ad where folks are just coming into the door, so the very top of the funnel, then you have to assess everyone. It has to be fair and uniform. If what you're going to do is perhaps take a moment to process resumes and see who has, for an example, the educational pedigree, they have the degree, they live within a certain amount of distance from the office, whatever that might be, and then basically screen from there. So you're turning a pool of candidates that was 50 into a pool of candidates that's now 10, and they have all qualified fairly and uniformly from that perspective. And then instead of assessing 50, you want to assess just those 10. As long as you assess all 10 of those, then you have met what the EEOC would consider to be an important criteria in terms of fair and uniform practices. And last but not least is to make sure that as you are using any assessment as part of a process for hiring someone, is to do everything that you can to document the process. So defensibility has always been the key. And sometimes we hear of folks who are using DISC as part of a pre-hire process, but they're not creating a benchmark. They're just using the assessment, and then based on the style of a person, making some determination as to whether or not they're going to fit, or that their style matches what they have in mind for the position. And just a quick example is if you are going to be hiring eye styles for sales positions. Although it seems to make perfect sense, if you have a documented process for how you came to that decision, then you're much better off, and you're going to steer clear of anything that the EEOC may eventually get involved with. So just defend the process for how you came to that decision, and that's really what we're here to talk about today. So as long as all of those criteria are met, if you like the word approved, then consider yourself stamped. With the seal of approval, you are all set as far as the EEOC is concerned to use DISC as part of a pre-hire process. So in terms of what benchmarks are and aren't, certainly what they're not, especially with DISC, is a measure of intelligence, or how many years someone has been doing something, or how badly they want the job. That's just not part of the benchmarking process. It is also not the be-all, end-all of the decision. So any assessment should make up no more than a third of the hiring decision. And what it also isn't is a scapegoat for the choices that you're making in terms of hiring or not hiring, or certainly from your perspective, what your clients are doing. And what we find sometimes is that when it comes to giving people bad news, meaning you didn't get the job, that sometimes the assessment becomes kind of a very convenient reason / excuse. And so, what we never want to hear is from a client to say to us, though, I took a call from someone who came in and applied for a job. They didn't get the job and asked me why. And I said, we would have loved to have hired you, but the assessment told us not to. Okay, so in those instances, we certainly want to steer clear the best we can from anything that looks like the assessment making a decision, when really what the assessment is supposed to be doing is giving you more information, becoming part of a larger process. So here's an example that we have, a real life example of an organization that used DISC as part of their pre-hire assessment, and we'll just kind of go through the process of how they came about the changes and meeting the goals that they wanted to. So what they did is they determined, based on, they had several, I think it was several thousand locations across the United States. And what they did was they had their sort of schema for coming up with who high performers were in a customer facing position and who the low performers were. And so in all of their stores, they came to a consensus of how they were going to measure both high and low performance, and it had to do with location profitability, service scores, on and on and on. But they really knew what it was that they were looking for, which made it a very easy process for them to identify who those high performers were in their organization in that position, and also who wasn't. And so they came up with, let's say, between 15 and 20, or 13 low and 21 high performers. And here's what they found is when they looked at the low performer natural style, they saw that there was a cluster in one area. And as they transformed between the natural style and the adapted style, they could literally see the trajectory, or what the change was between someone's natural style and what their adapted style was. And so they had an idea of what they were potentially looking to avoid in some measure of characteristics around the job. And then we also looked at the high performers. And even though if you were to look overall at where the cluster for their natural style was relatively similar. So it also was in I'm doing my air quotes here, the S neighborhood. But what was very interesting was what happened when you transitioned from natural style to adapted style, meaning when these people, the high performers, came to work, the hat that they put on for the day, the characteristics that they displayed during their job on a day-to-day basis was much different. So they traveled to another neighborhood. And this is part of the power of using DISC versus other assessments that are out there on the marketplace that are even designed specifically for pre-hire. Is DISC gives you both of those pictures of a person, both where they tend to return to naturally and where they may be clustering when it's time to go to work with a certain set of expectations or what have you. And so it's not just locked into this one, let's say, core personality or what have you picture that you're getting, but sometimes the transition between that natural style and adapted style is actually where the magic happens. And the true difference between a high performer and low performer is likely to reside. And so for this particular client, the end of the study and what they then over a course of a couple of years determined was that they could decrease their involuntary turnover. I will let you determine what involuntary turnover means. Of this key position by about 15%. Their customer service scores in those locations rose significantly. They were seeing less reports of workplace conflict, of bickering, and for their low-performing locations, an increase in profitability. Literally every measure that they could have hoped for as a result of using pre-hire assessments, in this case using DISC as their core pre-hire assessment, they met every mark that they were hoping to meet, and they're continuing to do that by refining the benchmarks that they have. So things were good immediately and are getting even better. So in terms of what assessments 24/7 can do, what we can have, and your association with Action Coach, what you have available to you through our system, we'll take a little bit of a look at that now. And so within the system, and if you have an account with us already, great. We can always add these components. If you don't have one, certainly let us know, and we can get you set up. But we'll just take a little bit of a look at the practical nuts and bolts how-to of building a benchmark. So within a kiosk or your assessment portal, you have several options. One of them at the top you'll see is managing assessments. And what you would do is choose managing assessments, and you'll see several options. The two at the bottom are the ones that we'll talk about. The second to last tab is the DISC fitness benchmarks. So you would simply select that. And this is the beginning of the benchmark building process. And so I have some here on my screen. These are ones that I use. Initially, yours would be blank, but eventually you build a library. So we'll talk about a couple of different types of benchmarks. The first is painted benchmarks, and painted benchmarks are literally manually created benchmarks. So I don't want to say from thin air because we don't want to do it that way, but from whatever pools of data or data types that you have available to you. You don't have to have a rich set of data in terms of incumbent, current high and low performers or anything of that nature. If you have a lot of good data, you can simply etch out a benchmark directly into the system. There are preset benchmarks from our library that we provide to you. Exemplar benchmarks, which is in the instance where you don't have a lot of data, but perhaps there is that one person that you would like to clone for all intents and purposes and hire more folks like that one. A concurrent benchmark is using multiple folks. Like in our study, we had both high and low performers. That's called a concurrent benchmark. We're using current performance data in order to create the benchmark. There are job description benchmarks, and that's an opportunity to survey, and we'll take a look at that. And then, of course, there's a combination of many different types of benchmarks that we all have available. So in the system, once you click to create a new benchmark, this is where you would start. And certainly from a starting perspective, this is where you could also do what I termed as paintbrush. And you would do that simply by choosing the ball that rests at 50%. And this is where all benchmarks start. And simply dragging and dropping it to where the different components, DI, S, and C, need to be for that given position. This is the least scientific. And when I can, I warn people away from using just a painted benchmark, because they are typically the hardest to defend. However, if you click on the load scores from, this is your opportunity now to build a more defensible, reliable benchmark. The first option that you will see there is preset benchmarks, and this is our library of, I believe, over 130 preset benchmarks in a variety of areas. So by selecting that, you would first see, sort of at the top of this box, categories. So there's medical, there's management, there's sales. So there's a variety of different categories. And then once you select the category, you will see a variety of choices beneath that. So not just medical, but then where in the world of medical positions is it that we're spending our time today? And in our case, we're choosing a nurse benchmark. And what we've done is built out a library where it will already automatically provide you with the levels of DI, S, and C for your benchmark, so that it is already locked in and you can just go ahead and use that. And these have been calibrated by professionals and our data scientists to work the way that they're supposed to. So that's one potential way to use the benchmark, is just to reach into a library of, let's call them, best practices. The second way is the user scores, and the user scores benchmark is what I term our exemplar benchmark. And so in this case, let's say you have an outgoing CEO where you're never going to have a rich pool of data, and you probably don't want someone else's version of what a CEO should be. But if your organization is doing well, and we could just create continuity by looking for someone who shares some of the characteristics with our incumbent or now outgoing CEO, then we can just use that one person score or even a small group's score. So this is what I would call an exemplar benchmark. And as you can see here at the bottom of the screen, we have the score for DI, S, and C for this person. And we can simply use that score to now measure incoming candidates against. The next is our group average, and this is the concurrent benchmark. And so the concurrent benchmark is typically the preferred model, the preferred method. And like our study, that is getting together groups of both high and low performers, finding out where they cluster. And we used to have to do this in a much more complicated way, where we had to get out spreadsheets and do math. And now the system simply does it all for you, which is fantastic, where we can look at both our high and low performer groups. And this could be for any position, and use their scores, their cluster, their data in order to improve the quality of folks and the job fit of folks who are coming in. So you can use this for groups of as few as 3 and as high as you want to go. Okay, and then again, it will create that DISC benchmark for you. And then our last option here is the job questionnaire. And this is really nifty. I would say that the best use for the job needs questionnaire or the job description benchmark is for positions where you don't have someone. Let's just, maybe it's an organization that has never had, who knows, an HR manager. And because they don't have this incumbent pool to draw from, and they maybe don't want to use just a preset benchmark, it's an opportunity to ask stakeholders within the organization, maybe the CEO or important managers or whoever it might be, maybe even gather some data from contributing employees, but ask the opinion of what this position should look like. In this position, What kind of person do we think would best fit? And so the system will actually take you through what amounts to taking DISC, but instead of for a person, it's for a position. What are the needs of this position? And as you go through and answer almost, again, just like DISC, 24 times, most least, it will then build that benchmark automatically for you based on your answers. So very interesting there. And one of the things that we see done very, very well is, let's say there was a managerial position and you asked a peer manager, the direct supervisor of who that was going to be, and then maybe a senior executive, all to complete a job needs questionnaire, is then to be able to sit down with that client and look at these 3 different viewpoints of what's needed for this position that you're hiring for, and have that consultative opportunity to flesh out those differences. Why do you see this position as so much different than I do? Do we have different expectations? Is this something that we should think more about? And gives you that chance to have a very, very rich conversation around exactly what the picture should look like before you go about the process of interviewing people and having different people have different opinions of what the needs of the position, and then therefore who should be in that position are. So it's a great consultative opportunity. Actually, all of these are. And so that's really where you get into the combination benchmark. When you are using benchmarks, let's say, of incumbent performers and some survey data of key stakeholders to that position, your CEO or what have you, and then maybe even looking at a preset benchmark, it now gives you much more data to start to have that determination and to start to have those collaborative conversations with your client around what exactly is it that we're looking for, and if there are misalignments or big gaps in the way that we see this versus the way that they see this versus the way that the world sees this, what are the things that we should consider before we start to actually measure people against this particular benchmark. So the more data you collect, the better your defensibility is, if and when you ever, for whatever reason, had to defend your benchmark or your process. I think another one of the key benefits of all this is that it's another way for you to stay connected to your clients, collaborating with your clients, showcasing your expertise to your clients by bringing in all of this rich conversation and starting to have them think about some of these tools in ways that they probably never had before. And of course, by using more, the overall effectiveness of your benchmarks typically is going to get better and better and better. Then what you want to do once you have all of that information in, right before I would say you lock that benchmark in for use, is to find a couple of additional sources to calibrate it. My favorite is the ONET. So if you were to Google ONET online, there is a resource that the government provides that looks at many different areas of any position. So you can simply go to the ONET and search for nurse or search for engineering manager, and it will bring you up a variety of pieces of information about that job and who's likely to be most successful in it. So once you have that benchmark, your DISC benchmark created, this is a great place to go to just say, okay, based on the benchmark we've created, where are we going to see our DISC clues in the ONET? So attention to detail, persistence, support, realistic. These are all words that we can easily plot over a DISC graph. Just looking at those words, we'll see and start to draw a firmer picture of what type of person, what types of characteristics, and of course, what type of style they're most likely to embody. And it does a great job of sort of validating the results that you had as part of your benchmark. This is your opportunity once you've done all of this, and you can see that there's a bit of work that goes into this in terms of data collection, but it's very, very good work. Is you can make any final adjustments that you have and then lock your benchmark in. And so you can see on the right-hand side of the screen where the vertical bar graphs are, you are naming your benchmark, placing it into a category if you desire, applying it to a group, and then of course creating any notes. And that notes field is definitely something that I'd say take advantage of, because that's part of your documentation process of how you got to where it is that you go. Now, that's all fine and good, and building benchmarks is a great activity, both for yourself, for your clients, and for their effectiveness overall in terms of the way that they're bringing people in, or at least thinking through. But the rubber hits the road when you start to use that benchmark in order to measure the candidates that are coming in and to use that data. And so jumping back to our system, up on top with your Managing Assessments tab, now you would be navigating down to the very bottom, the last tab, which is the DISC Fitness Reporting, and putting this benchmark to use. And so what you have in your system is an ability to use that benchmark now with a group of incoming potential candidates, and to create some both graphic and then paper-based reports that you can utilize with your clients. So in this case, we're looking at an engineering manager position, and you can see that we have all users, and we can view sort of our group graphs at whole. But then we have Ben, Alex, Peter, Adam, and Tony, in this case, that we are measuring against our benchmark. And so we have both our job profile survey, or our questionnaire, as well as our high performer benchmark and our low performer benchmark, because I can tell you that a lot of the clients that I talk to, that I've worked with over the years, as much as they want the best possible fit, they are just as interested in avoiding the worst possible fit, right? So there's getting exactly the right candidate, very important. Avoiding the wrong candidate, equally important in a lot of cases. And so we have a color-coded system where our dark blue is going to be anyone who's between a 90 and 100% match to our ideal candidate benchmark. And then we have our lighter blue, which is anyone who's between 89 and 80% of a match to the benchmark, and basically anyone lower than 80% is going to come in, you're represented by orange. So hopefully you can see that at a glance, we have a couple of good matches, potentially a couple people to perform interviews with, maybe ask better interview questions based on some of the things that they have that are on and off the benchmark. So when you have this graphic, what you can do is actually click right on the 96%. So you would just click right on the number, and it will bring up a snapshot report of this person's fit. In this case, Ben Camp. His fit to the benchmark, as you can see, overall is very high. And then you'll also see the 4 DISC factors, our DI, S, and C, and where Ben matched up against the benchmark there. So Ben is our blue bar, and our red hash, that's our benchmark. How far off was this person from the benchmark, and in which areas? And we also have the same thing for our 12 DISC factors. So you'll see exactly, again, peeling that onion an additional layer, where they fall on the benchmark and where they're off. And sometimes we have candidates who are great matches to the benchmark, except for one area or 2 areas. And what that allows us to do in the interviewing process is to ask better behavioral-based questions. There are areas where we probably don't have a lot to ask because they're great matches, but in the areas where they're off, we can allow them to fill in the information gap to a degree, if there's just 1 or 2 areas where they're off, by asking good interview questions. And so you become a much better interviewer by understanding this already. You also have an opportunity using this information to avoid some of the common mistakes of interviewing. Certainly there's bias, where sometimes we like to hire people, and it's just sort of a tendency, I think, that happens more than we think, of people that look and sound like us, and we tend to like those candidates a bit more. Or in some cases, in fact, an engineering manager is probably a good example. So here are Ben. Ben, based on his style, he's a high C, might not blow you away in the interview, may come off maybe even as underconfident, right? Or overly cautious, and maybe that leaks into the interview process. So when Ben leaves the room, you may have a sense that, it was just an okay candidate, where the next person who comes in the room maybe is much higher in different components, in I or maybe some D, and the interview is much different. Their answers sound much different. They sound much more confident. And who knows, they might even be talking in terms of what they're going to do when they get on the job, right? Sort of that DI direct interviewing style. And sometimes what happens is, in fact, it's one of the DISC styles is a dynamo, where that person may leave the interview and just have your jaw hit the floor and say, wow, I think that's our person because they interviewed so well. But the components of the job might call for something entirely different. And Ben, who did not blow you away in the interview, may be the best long-term choice for the position based on the needs of the position. So it helps us to eliminate, just using the data, some of the common blunders we see in the hiring process that then just sort of repeat themselves over and over and over again. So you have the snapshot report, but then you also have a fuller 7-page report that looks at many more components in terms of fast facts about the candidate versus facts about the position. Again, a little bit more in terms of the amount and richness of the data that you're going to get from it in order for you to share with your clients, sit down and really talk out the needs of the position versus the characteristics of the candidate. And it just gives you that extra sense of comfort as you're going through the process of bringing someone into your organization. And I should say that once someone has taken the DISC report, they have available to them their standard report, which then becomes a tool for onboarding, which becomes a tool for development and all those great things. That these fitness reports don't even cost anything extra. They are just part of the system, as is the entire benchmarking platform. It doesn't cost you anything to have this added to your assessment portal and to use the reports and to create benchmarks. So there's a lot of great opportunity, and hopefully, it gets the wheels turning for you a little bit, not just with what you could do with your current clients, but a different way, a new opportunity, a new way to wedge that door open with folks that you're not yet working with. So, it's just a different opportunity to engage them. And we also have some improvements to the report that we've recently put in. Certainly the job questionnaire is something that I would say in the last 3 or 4 months has become a fantastic opportunity to gather data. But we've got some more reports improvements upcoming. So in this case, looking at our 12 integrated behaviors. Now we'll be looking at them in language that is probably a little clearer than it has been in the past. And we're also going to be looking at both the natural and adapted style to take those critical shifts between natural and adapted into account. So this is certainly, and I don't think any of our products are ever done. We're always looking to improve, to push the envelope, to make these things as useful for you as we possibly can. So our ears, let's just say, are always open to how we can make this even better and more useful for you and your clients. So one of the things that we talked about recently, so I call it my breaking news here, is that creating any type of benchmark is free to you. And I want to emphasize really the to you part, because this is something that you should look at as a profit opportunity with clients. But to you, any type of benchmark that you create and any amount of benchmarks that you create is free to you, including the incumbent benchmarks. So I think that this is incredibly interesting, including the incumbent benchmarks, where what we're doing potentially with a client you've never worked with before is allowing their high and low performers to take DISC and use that data to build a benchmark. And if all you're looking to do is build the benchmark, you're not looking to see their individual reports, but we want to see where they cluster, is an opportunity for you to engage your clients in having people take the DISC assessment at no charge. And I think that this is a fantastic way to open the door, is to go to a client who perhaps you don't work with yet, and say, would you be interested in building a high performer benchmark, getting a sense of what high performance with your managers looks like, so that as you're bringing more managers in, they fit that mold a little bit better. So just an unbelievable opportunity for you to do that. And that's whether they have, you're measuring 10, 20, however many, we will provide a link to you so that you can gather that data. If and when they want to see their high performer or low performers individual reports, well, that just becomes another profit opportunity. You can buy those reports from us if and when they want to see specific employees' reports. But the initial aspect of having them take the assessment in order to build a benchmark is just included with your system. So there's even more opportunities to get involved, to get your clients involved. And one of the things that I convinced my bosses, Brandon is on the phone right now, to do is to also change the way that we're introducing, because pre-hire assessment is so different, is changing the way that we can get them involved with taking the assessment or using it in pre-hire. Certainly from a cost perspective, if you have 10 or 20 candidates for a job, well, you're only going to hire one. Right. So how many assessment reports do you kind of want to live with when you're really just trying to find that one candidate? So rather than having to purchase assessment reports for 20 or 50 or sometimes even 100 people who you're not going to employ, we're going to introduce, and see how it goes, an opportunity to just pay a per job fee. And again, we'll create a link for you. But whether 2 candidates or 10 candidates or 50 candidates apply for a job, it's a flat fee to you. And therefore you can position it as a flat fee to your clients, so that you don't have to worry about, clicks and units and all that. And so we found that about 80% of your job candidates are going to come in within the first 10 days of a job being posted. So the first 10 days of availability is where you get about 80% of your applicants. And so we're creating 10-day access for $250, regardless of how many assessment reports are used. And so if that's something of interest to you, and I don't know how long it'll last, but it's $250 per job. And you see that there's a tiny URL benchmark here. It's tinyurl.com/AC, so Action Coach Benchmark. If you enter that, you'll be able to add them to your cart, and I would say add as many as you think you might want to. This is a great opportunity to make a huge difference in what your clients are doing and how they're getting involved in assessments. Jeffrey Gitomer was a keynote for us at our last conference, and what he proposed, and I thought it was brilliant, was when you're looking to work with someone, when you're trying to bring on a new client, one of the things that you want to do is make sure that you add something of value first before you try to transact with them, before you try to create a financial relationship, is to give something away. And so I think that the benchmarking is an opportunity to give something of extreme value away, because even before you use the first assessment to measure a candidate, just understanding what high performance looks like for your front of house or your mechanics or your engineers, understanding as an organization what high performance looks like is immensely valuable. And if there's no charge to you, that means you potentially can give something of great value to someone else before you start interacting with them in a financial way, and have them create that type of relationship for you. How and where to find clients? Certainly, what we want to do is make sure that you have as many opportunities as you can. Obviously, when it comes to introducing a new service like this, a new aspect, the best opportunities you have are the ones that are already clients. And it's an opportunity to either talk to clients that you were working with that maybe you don't work with as much, you're not talking as much anymore, to reintroduce yourself and to introduce a new service, or even folks that you have that are warm or current clients. We see people actively looking for associations. Think of associations as a great ground for using benchmarks, because what you can do with an association, and who knows, it could be the Association of Pediatric Nurses, is at no charge to you, and whatever charge you determine to your client, you could help the association build a benchmark of what performance looks like for their members. And if they're associated with you by determining what a high-performing nurse practitioner or a high-performing engineering manager, and that becomes part of what the association can offer to its members, then you have the potential to exponentially increase the number of organizations that you're now interacting with through creating and using benchmarks. And we've even had folks where it says here at the bottom, when all else fails, indeed. When we introduced this, some folks just went straight to the want ads. And if they saw organizations that were always advertising for a position, it might be a good conversation to have with them. Did you want to build a benchmark? If they see a position that's being offered over and over and over again in intervals, chances are it means that they're bringing people in that aren't working out and they're turning over. So again, another opportunity. So even just the want ads, the help wanted ads, is a good place to keep your eye on for where someone might need some help. But it's really anywhere that has people, that needs people, that is looking to improve the way that they are interacting with new employees at that pre-hire, so really all the way down to inception. And just wrapping up here, what I've found over the past 15 years is the average benchmark, and this is just for something maybe a little more entry level, so a supervisory position up to management positions, creating the benchmark, just that process of creating a benchmark, is valued at between $2,500 and $5,000. Again, that's no cost to you but your time, but there's a lot of standalone value to that benchmark, a lot of profit opportunity. And so you have these opportunities with the per job assessment cost, so the $250 for 10 days. That's something that we would assume and expect folks to mark up, almost sort of in a wholesale retail environment. And then I just ask folks, where's your low-hanging fruit? If you wanted to give this a try, if you wanted to take a week or a couple of conversations and just see if this has any traction for you, any grit with the folks you're working with, where's your low-hanging fruit? Where's an opportunity for you to introduce a new way to work together that you haven't before? Okay, so that's it for me. I just would ask you, sort of food for thought. Do you have someone that's having trouble with high turnover, or is it a question maybe that you've never even asked? Does someone have, certainly we're seeing with the amount of boomers that are retiring right now being in the thousands per day, is there an opportunity to work on a higher profile position potentially? Or in succession planning, the system also works extremely well, even with internal employees. So you've obviously got the external bringing people in, but also for the folks that you have, who's got the shortest path to success for filling a position that's going to be coming open soon. And just to put myself out there and be available to you, if this is of interest to you, but you're not really sure of again, the nuts and bolts and how to do it, then let's build your first one together. I am available for this. This is certainly a part of what I do. I've got quite a bit of experience in doing it, and I would be more than happy to work with you as you get going, as you familiarize yourself with the system and the different types of benchmarks. And so I am here and at the ready to help. And with that, I will throw it back to Kristen and Brandon if they have any thoughts or additions, or to any questions that you might have for me.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks.
Does anyone have any questions for Mark before we end our webinar?
Linda, I just want to thank you, Mark. This is clearly something that I resonate with. I am a former Chief Human Resource Officer and believe totally in this kind of work. So thank you for adding this value to us today.
Absolutely. Thanks. And please reach out if you have an opportunity. Let's work on one together.
Thank you. Great. I'm working with a construction company right now, and unemployment rate is pretty low in their area, but they're also thinking about succession planning. So I'm excited to know about this tool and use it there more.
Perfect. Great. Great. Good opportunity. Thank you, Linda.
Anyone else with any questions? I don't think so. Awesome.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. Really appreciate the time.
Oh, no,
And-
thank you. And if you have people who are viewing the recording, again, feel free to make sure that they have my direct contact info to set up a time to speak privately about projects that they have going on or just more general information.
Fantastic. Will do. We're going to get this posted on our internal dashboard as well for other people to view and listen. And we appreciate your time. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.